I'm Rebecca, 38 years old, and until just last month, I held the position of Senior Project Manager at Callister Technologies. After dedicating 15 years of my life to the company, I was abruptly called into a meeting with Stephanie from HR and my supervisor, Margaret. In under 10 minutes, they informed me that due to restructuring, my role had been eliminated. I smiled, shook their hands, and walked out with my head held high. What they didn't realize was that I'd seen this move coming long ago. I was already several steps ahead. Let me know where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and stick around to hear how Betrayal turned into the biggest win of my career. My journey at Callister started right after college. I was 23, full of ambition and idealism, carrying a fresh business degree and absolutely no clue about the realities of corporate life. Back then, the company was modest, just 60 people in a small office in downtown Seattle. I remember walking in on my first day, clutching a leather portfolio my parents had given me as a graduation gift, nervous but excited to prove myself. I began as an entry-level coordinator under Brian Thompson, one of the most genuine leaders I've ever known. Brian believed in me before I believed in myself. He turned my mistakes into lessons and made sure my wins were celebrated. He taught me more than just processes. He taught me how to lead, how to influence without authority, and how to manage relationships with empathy. My first breakthrough came 8 months in when we were struggling with a difficult client, Martin Financial. Their CEO was infamous for switching project specs midway and blaming us for delays. After watching several senior staff members try and fail, I spent a weekend redesigning our communication approach. Brian allowed me to present it to the client myself, and they loved it. Suddenly, I was the go-to person for that account. At 24, I had earned my first real credibility. That win opened doors. Diana in marketing started giving me inside info on campaigns. Marcus in engineering became my go-to for tech clarifications. Lauren from legal showed me how to draft airtight but client-friendly contracts. By age 27, I had been promoted to project manager, the youngest in the company's history. My team respected me because I worked alongside them, not above them. We pulled all-nighters together, toasted wins with the bottle of champagne I kept hidden in my desk drawer, and built a work family. Everything changed 5 years ago when our original CEO retired and Thomas Williams took over. He came from a big corporate background and brought with him a high-pressure culture. Everything was about metrics, KPIs, and quarterly results. Gone were the relaxed brainstorm sessions and team retreats. We now had strategy intensives and number-driven reviews. I adjusted. I built new systems to track performance, learned the language of shareholder value, and translated executive speak into practical actions for my team. And it paid off. My projects remained on time, under budget, and our client satisfaction topped the charts for 3 consecutive years. During this period, 2 rival firms approached me with lucrative job offers, better pay, nicer titles, and fancy perks. But I turned them down. I had roots at Callister. I had shaped our project office from scratch. My influence was baked into every document, every system, every training. Leaving felt impossible. 3 years ago, Brian retired, and his replacement, Margaret Wilson, came in. She had an MBA from Wharton and experience at a Fortune 500 company. At first, I was hopeful. She praised my department, took me to lunch, asked about my long-term goals, and even mentioned a potential director role as we grew. She backed a proposal of mine that had been stuck in limbo for years and started including me in high-level meetings. But over time, things changed. She started questioning tried-and-true methods. Outside consultants were brought in and suggested sweeping changes that made no sense to anyone familiar with our clients. Slowly, she stopped inviting me to meetings, brushing it off as nothing urgent. Despite all this, I stayed committed to mentoring the next generation. I saw myself in Jessica, a new grad, and made sure she got the same breaks Brian gave me. Andrew, a career switcher, had tons of potential, and I helped him develop the technical side. I shielded them from politics and celebrated their wins like my own. Behind the scenes, I was making sacrifices. My partner, James, understood when I canceled plans or skipped vacations for work. We had talked about starting a family, but it always got postponed, for a promotion, a launch, a milestone. I missed birthdays, left weddings early, and even worked through pneumonia because a deadline couldn't wait. I believed it would all be worth it, that my loyalty and hard work would be recognized. But now, I realized that in their eyes, my dedication was never a strength, it was just expected. The more I gave, the more they took, until my above and beyond efforts became their baseline. The very foundation I built started to crack, and I didn't see it. The breaking point came during a leadership meeting. I had spent weeks building a detailed strategy to address client churn. It was thorough, based on data, feedback, and market insights. I submitted it to Margaret 2 days ahead of time. She thanked me. But when the meeting started, she presented my work, without me. My name was gone. She claimed it as her own and basked in the praise from Thomas and the execs. I was in shock, sitting in silence as she stole my moment. Afterward, I confronted her. My hands trembled, but I asked directly why she took credit for my work. Her response? It's company property, Rebecca. And as the department head, it reflects on my leadership. I thought you were a team player. That was the moment it clicked. Speaking up would only make me look bitter. From that point on, I noticed the walls closing in. More meetings happened without me. Decisions were made above my head. The writing was on the wall. The strategic meetings I had always been part of were suddenly being held during times when I had immovable client obligations. When I asked for notes or recaps, the responses were vague, brushed off as preliminary talks with nothing firm yet. Diana from marketing, who remained a trusted confidant after all these years, pulled me aside after one of those sessions. She's sabotaging you, she whispered, checking to make sure no one overheard. She pitched your client expansion idea, but claimed she had to fix it before bringing it to leadership. At the same time, I began noticing a pattern in hiring. New senior-level employees were being brought in, people with far less experience than qualified internal candidates who were quietly passed over. Allison, for example, just 30 and with only 4 years of project management under her belt, was given a senior manager title. Ryan, who had jumped between 3 jobs in 2 years, came in as a director. What they shared? A history at Margaret's previous company. Then came targeted budget cuts, affecting only my department. 2 roles left open due to retirements weren't refilled but simply eliminated. Equipment upgrades approved for other departments were suddenly deemed non-essential for us. Professional development? Training sessions went to the new hires, bypassing my long-tenured, capable team. One late evening, as I was wrapping up a report, I overheard voices from the adjacent conference room. The door was cracked open, and I instantly recognized the speakers, Margaret and Thomas. Margaret's tone was clear and dismissive. Legacy staff are stuck in outdated ways, she said. We need new talent, people without ingrained habits. Thomas sounded hesitant. Some of them have key client relationships, he said. Those belong to Callister, Margaret responded. We'll phase them out gradually. I slipped out of the hallway before they noticed me, my thoughts spinning. Legacy employees. That was me. That was my team. We were the ones who had built the foundation strong enough to attract leaders like Margaret in the first place. Still, I didn't give up. I updated my certifications, immersed myself in new project methodologies, and proactively joined cross-functional efforts to demonstrate adaptability. I worked even harder, determined to prove I still brought value. So when Margaret handed me a critical client assignment with an unrealistic 6-week deadline, half the industry average, I knew it was a setup. But I accepted. I worked nights. I brought lunch in for my team so we wouldn't lose momentum during breaks. I negotiated phase-based deliverables with the client to buy more time. We pulled it off, on time, with complete functionality and stellar client feedback. I expected, at the very least, some acknowledgement. But Margaret barely reacted. The client seemed satisfied with the basic delivery, she said, scrolling through the glowing testimonial. Though I'm not convinced it's a scalable model. The pressure was starting to show in my health. I couldn't sleep, 3 a.m. would hit, and I'd be wide awake, consumed by anxiety over work. I had migraines that lingered for days. I lost my appetite, surviving on snacks grabbed between back-to-back crisis calls. James noticed the change. One Sunday, I spent the entire day glued to my laptop, prepping for the week ahead. He gently shut the screen, took my hands, and said, "Becca, this isn't sustainable. You're giving everything to people who clearly don't appreciate you." "It's just a rough patch," I said. "It's been a rough patch for a year," he replied. "Maybe it's time to think about what's next." That suggestion felt like a betrayal. Leave Callister? This company had been my professional world for almost my entire adult life. My team felt like family. My projects were personal. How could I walk away from that? "I can't just quit," I said. "That would mean they win." James looked at me gently. "Who's they? And what are they winning?" I didn't have an answer. But for the first time, a seed of doubt took root. What if all my loyalty and sacrifices weren't valued at all? What if the company I gave everything to could discard me without a second thought? Then came the final blow. I discovered I wasn't invited to the annual leadership retreat, an event I had attended without fail for the past 7 years. These retreats shaped the company's direction for the coming year. Trying to stay calm, I approached Margaret. "I noticed I'm not on the retreat list. Was that an oversight?" She didn't even look up from her laptop. "We've streamlined attendance. Only directors and above this year." "But Jason's going," I said, referring to another senior project manager at my level. "He's presenting the new client acquisition strategy," she replied smoothly. "A strategy one contributed significantly to," I reminded her. Finally, she looked up. "The decision has been made. Jason will represent your department just fine." As I walked away, a chilling clarity settled in. This wasn't just bad leadership or a clash of personalities. It was deliberate. Calculated. Margaret wasn't just making changes, she was erasing me from the picture. And if I kept pretending it would get better, I'd soon have nothing left at all. I realized then that I had to stop reacting passively. I needed to open my eyes. I had to protect myself, because clearly, no one else would. Once I acknowledged that my role was under threat, I started to see everything differently. Things I'd ignored before now stood out. I began cultivating relationships with those who had insight. Brenda, Thomas's executive assistant, had been around almost as long as I had. We'd always been on friendly terms, but I made the effort to bring her coffee, ask about her grandkids, and take genuine interest. In return, she started offering quiet warnings. "Margaret was in with Thomas for 2 hours yesterday, lots of charts, no interruptions allowed," she murmured one morning. I reached out to Gregory, a trusted former colleague who had moved on to a competitor. We met discreetly at a restaurant well away from downtown. After I told him what was going on, he nodded gravely. "It's happening everywhere," he said. "Companies want outside hires. They say it's about innovation, but really, it's because new people don't remember how things used to be. They don't expect fairness." He also gave me market insight and alerted me to possible openings elsewhere. "If things crash at Callister, call me," he said. "My CEO would bring you on in a second." Back at the office, I dug deeper. I began analyzing the backgrounds of our new hires. My instincts were right. 8 of the 11 recent management-level hires had ties to Margaret's former company. They moved as a unit, eating lunch together, backing each other's initiatives no matter how poorly conceived. But my most important discovery happened by chance. Late one night, while looking for archived financial data for a proposal, I opened a misfiled folder labeled Strategic Planning 2025. Inside was a PowerPoint deck that clearly wasn't meant for general access. As I clicked through the slides, horror grew in my chest. The presentation outlined a plan to consolidate departments and reduce headcount, targeting roles labeled Legacy Overhead. My department was specifically mentioned. One note read, "Client relationships can be transitioned to more cost-effective hires." Then I saw it, my name. Listed under Phase 1 Transitions. Scheduled for the current quarter. Heart pounding, I immediately copied the relevant slides to my personal cloud storage and closed the file. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The erasure wasn't accidental. It was scripted. Planned. And underway. They weren't just sidelining me anymore. They were preparing to erase my role completely. The next day, I arranged lunch with Nathan, our IT director, someone I had always found honest, maybe too much so. I subtly guided our conversation toward the topic of department shifts. "Oh yeah, big changes are on the horizon," he said casually, not realizing he'd confirmed my worst suspicions. "Thomas wants to streamline. Margaret's pushing for it hard. HR's already drafting severance packages. Any particular departments being looked at?" I asked, careful to keep my tone light. Nathan hesitated, then dropped his voice. "I probably shouldn't say, but they're eyeing project management. There's talk of rolling it under customer success for efficiency." That same afternoon, I began compiling a personal archive. I meticulously documented my major accomplishments and project outcomes over the past 15 years. I saved key client emails and impact metrics, backed up glowing performance reviews, client endorsements, and proof of financial value I had delivered. I also began quietly copying myself on critical client threads to ensure I retained indirect access to relationships I had spent years cultivating, connections technically owned by the company but deeply personal in practice. I reached out to Harold, my mentor from my early years at Callister, now retired. We met at a quiet cafe on a Saturday morning, well away from anyone who might recognize us. After I laid everything out, Harold wasn't shocked. "Thomas has always cared more about optics than outcomes," he said. "And hiring Margaret was their way of signaling a shift away from what built the company in the first place." "What do I do?" I asked, feeling exposed in a way I rarely allowed myself to be. Harold paused before responding. "Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Update your resume. Start having quiet conversations. Keep showing up, but document everything, especially the wins and relationships. And don't let their inability to see your worth make you question it." His words aligned with the strategy I'd already begun piecing together. I wouldn't go quietly. If they planned to discard me, they'd have to work for it, and they'd remember it. Confirmation came soon after. Margaret began holding frequent one-on-ones with Amanda, a recent hire from her old firm. Twice I passed by their meetings and caught glimpses of my client notes and reports on their table. Once, I clearly heard Margaret say, after the transition. That night, I dusted off my resume and brought my LinkedIn profile up to date, careful not to signal that I was job hunting. I reconnected with past Callister colleagues now working elsewhere and initiated casual chats that might evolve into opportunities. I also met with Stephanie, a friend from college who specialized in employment law, to review my non-compete agreement. Over dinner at her home, she combed through the document. "It's actually pretty limited," she said. "You're barred from bringing over your clients for a year, but only ones you personally managed." It doesn't stop you from working in the same industry, even with direct competitors. What about IP? I asked. All the systems, templates, protocols I created? General knowledge and skills are yours, she clarified. Just don't take anything proprietary, no files, no actual documents. But your experience? They can't touch that. With that reassurance, I began drafting my contingency plan. If they wanted me out, I'd make the process as costly and inconvenient as possible, while ensuring my next chapter would be stronger. On the surface, I remained the model employee. I delivered results, stayed upbeat with colleagues, and even mentored new hires, Amanda included. All the while, I observed, documented, and fortified my network. I no longer operated out of blind loyalty. I began treating my career like a diversified portfolio, with Mal Lister as one investment, not the whole. The shift was both unnerving and empowering. For 15 years, I defined myself by this company. Now, I was finally seeing myself as a seasoned professional with value far beyond one employer's walls. Soon, the signs of my upcoming dismissal became too blatant to ignore. 3 of my key projects were reassigned without explanation. My weekly one-on-ones with Margaret were first delayed, then erased from the calendar. When we did cross paths, her tone was curt, robotic, none of the collaboration she extended to others. The confirmation came when she asked me to partner with Amanda on process documentation for my clients. Just in case you hit the lottery and retire early, she said with a forced smile that made her real intent obvious. I smiled back and agreed. But I was strategic. I gave Amanda the shell, frameworks, structure, but withheld the deeper relationship nuances, the trust one had built over years. That can't be captured in documentation anyway. Then, the moment I'd been preparing for arrived. While digging for a budget file, I found that same restructuring presentation, but it had been updated. My termination was now scheduled for the coming Friday. Amanda was listed as my replacement, assigned to my client accounts. My severance was outlined, 2 weeks per year served, contingent on signing a non-disparagement agreement. 15 years of my life, reduced to 30 weeks of silence. The insult wasn't the money, it was the message. The stress hit hard. I dropped 5 pounds in a week. My sleep fragmented, I woke every hour. I developed an eye twitch that wouldn't go away, no matter what I tried. One Tuesday morning, the mask cracked. Midway through another tightly wound day, I escaped to the restroom and had a full-blown panic attack. Rachel from accounting found me hunched in a stall, gasping for air. She didn't ask questions. She just stayed with me until I could breathe again. Then she walked me to the park nearby, where we sat in silence until I could speak. "They're restructuring again, aren't they?" she asked softly. I nodded, bound by professionalism even now. "It's not you," she said with certainty. "I've been here 2 decades. This is my 4th restructure. It's never about performance, it's about quarterly reports and executive power moves." Oddly, her words soothed me. This wasn't about my failure. This was a performance, and I was just a cast member in a script written long before I knew my part. The week of my scheduled departure brought an odd change in Margaret. Suddenly, she was polite, even friendly, dropping by to ask about my weekend, praising my work in meetings. It felt hollow and unsettling. Stephanie from HR, normally warm and outgoing, avoided me entirely. We shared an elevator in complete silence once. Her discomfort confirmed she was in the loop. On the morning I was set to be let go, I dressed with purpose, black trousers, white blouse, my sharpest blazer. My armor. I arrived early, quietly sorted my personal effects, backed up my contacts one last time, and wiped my digital footprint. At 9:30, the calendar pinged, discussion with HR, 10 a.m. conference room B. No agenda. No details. I took 10 minutes to gather myself, mentally reviewing my talking points. Then I stood, straightened my spine, and walked to the room like I owned it. Margaret and Stephanie were already there, identical folders on the table. Margaret gave me a practiced smile, but I saw the relief behind her eyes. She had been waiting for this. "Rebecca, thanks for joining us," she began, pretending I had any real choice. "As you're aware, Mal Lister has been undergoing a strategic realignment to prepare for the future." I nodded but said nothing, leaving her to continue the charade. "After much consideration, we've decided to eliminate your position as part of this restructuring." The words were flat. Mechanical. She expected tears, maybe even thanks. "Stephanie has your severance details," she added, pushing a folder toward me. 2 weeks per year of service, 3 months of benefits continuation, and career transition support. I flipped the folder open and scanned the pages. As expected. Word for word from the confidential deck I had uncovered. Non-disparagement, non-solicitation, full release of claims. "I'll need time to review this with my attorney," I said, voice calm. Margaret blinked. This wasn't the response she expected. "Well, these are standard terms," she said quickly. "Standard by whose definition?" I asked, smiling politely. "Industry norms for my level and tenure tend to start at 1 month per year." Stephanie shifted awkwardly. "We could explore some flexibility." "Great," I replied. "I'll have my lawyer send a counterproposal. In the meantime, let's discuss how to manage the transition of my client accounts." That caught them off guard. They were expecting resistance or tears, not professionalism. "Amanda will be taking over," Margaret said. "We'd like you to brief her this afternoon." "That won't work," I responded smoothly. "Several of my accounts are in critical phases. Jackson Financial, in particular, has a key person clause in their contract, my name, specifically." I watched Margaret pale. "Additionally," I continued, "Blue River Technologies has indicated discomfort with changes to their account team. They've said they might revisit the partnership if their manager changes." That was true, thanks to carefully planted conversations I'd had weeks prior. What was meant to be a 10-minute exit stretched to 45 as we renegotiated. In the end, I secured full salary and benefits for a 30-day transition period, during which I would brief Amanda at my own pace and maintain client continuity. The severance package remained in limbo as legal consultations continued. Once negotiations wrapped, I shook their hands with composure, locking eyes until they looked away first. I walked out with my pride intact, even as my pulse pounded so hard I wondered if they could hear it. Security was stationed near my office, ready to escort me as I packed my things. It was protocol, sure, but after 15 years without a single infraction, it felt like a slap in the face. I greeted Frank, the assigned security guard, with a smile and chatted about his recent trip while placing my belongings in a cardboard box. Word traveled quickly. Several colleagues came by to say goodbye. Jessica embraced me tightly, tears streaking down her cheeks. "This is wrong," she whispered. "They're making a terrible mistake." Andrew gave a formal handshake and discreetly passed me his card. "For when you find somewhere better," he murmured. As I walked to my car, cradling the box of my career, reality began to crash in. 15 years, gone. My identity as Rebecca from Callister, erased in less than an hour. The shock was visceral, like slamming into invisible glass. I kept it together until I reached my car. Then the tears came, hot, relentless, and furious. I wept for the betrayal of my loyalty, for the unnoticed sacrifices, for believing, foolishly, that commitment would one day be rewarded. I cried until my voice was hoarse and my eyes stung. When I finally started the engine, I felt hollowed out. But beneath the grief, something stubborn burned: resolve. This wasn't my ending. It was simply the end of a chapter. I would write the next one. I drove home on autopilot, hands guiding the wheel while my mind leapt into the future. By the time I reached the driveway, the numbness had cooled into sharp, focused anger. James was waiting inside, a bottle already open. He'd known this was coming, just as I had. "It's done," I said. He didn't offer clichés. He just held me while I cycled through devastation, fury, and finally a strange calm. The worst had happened. The uncertainty was over. Now it was time to rebuild. "One night," I told him, sipping the last of the wine. "I get one night to fall apart. Tomorrow, we execute the plan." He nodded. He knew that the version of me he admired, the strategist, the fighter, was back. The rules had changed, but I wasn't out of the game. I was just getting started. At dawn, I rose before my alarm. Despite the emotional upheaval, my mind was razor-sharp. While James slept, I sat at the kitchen table with strong coffee and my laptop. I had a plan, and now it was time to act. My first call was to Elizabeth Davis, a former client now working as Director of Operations at Nexus Systems, Callister's top competitor. We'd maintained occasional lunch meetings, careful to keep discussions neutral. "Rebecca, I was just thinking of you," she said warmly. "How's everything at Callister?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling," I said. "As of yesterday, I'm no longer with them." "Their loss," Elizabeth replied without pause. "And possibly our gain. Can you do coffee this week?" We scheduled a catch-up, unofficial but clearly job-related. Next, I messaged Michael Chen, a former teammate now VP at Tech Future, another industry heavyweight. His reply was blunt: "Send your resume today. Come in Thursday. We've got a few openings I think you'd be perfect for, I'll fast-track it." By noon, I had contacted a dozen key connections. 4 interviews were already booked, and several others offered to keep me in mind. The response was both humbling and validating. The professional world still recognized my worth, even if Callister didn't. While job prospects began to bloom, I also tackled the severance package. Stephanie had suggested I speak to Catherine Wallace, an employment lawyer. I scheduled a consultation that afternoon. Catherine reviewed the paperwork and frowned. "This is insulting for someone of your tenure and seniority," she said, highlighting overly restrictive clauses. Together, we drafted a counteroffer: 6 months' salary and benefits, accelerated stock vesting, and a softened non-disparagement clause that would let me speak honestly without legal backlash. "Will they go for it?" I asked. "Not at first," Catherine replied. "But this sets our anchor. If they want client cooperation during the transition, they'll need to move closer to fair." In the meantime, I built a detailed portfolio, highlighting accomplishments, quantifiable results, and client testimonials. I even prepared a presentation showcasing my vision for client success, a pitch I could tailor for interviews. Then came the delicate client outreach. I made personal calls to longtime contacts, careful not to breach confidentiality. "I wanted you to hear this from me," I told Jackson at Jackson Financial. "I've left Callister, part of a restructuring." "That's troubling," he responded. "This project's at a critical juncture. We've built a lot of trust with you." "I understand," I said gently. "While I'll do my best to ensure a smooth transition, I should mention there's a key person clause in our contract, with my name on it." There was a pause. "Let me loop in legal," Jackson said. "Where are you going next?" "Still taking shape," I answered honestly. "But I'll keep you posted." Other clients shared similar concerns. Margaret had been telling them I'd left voluntarily, for personal reasons, an obvious misdirection. Several clients were unsettled by that, especially given the state of their accounts. Some even asked to review their agreements or pause project renewals. By the week's end, pressure was mounting at Callister. 3 clients had contacted Margaret directly, invoking contractual clauses that required formal notice of leadership changes. 2 demanded meetings before agreeing to extensions. Meanwhile, my counteroffer had been reviewed. Stephanie requested another meeting. I arrived poised and prepared, dressed sharply and carrying a binder filled with documentation, proof of my contributions and industry severance benchmarks. "Thanks for coming in," Stephanie greeted me, noticeably more courteous. "We've reviewed your proposal. We can't meet every request, but we're prepared to improve the offer." The new terms included 4 months' salary, 6 months' benefits, and a softened non-disparagement clause, still below industry norm, but far better than their first draft. "It's a step in the right direction," I acknowledged. "But given my 15-year tenure and critical client relationships, I believe 6 months' salary is appropriate, especially considering the Jackson and Blue River key person clauses, which could trigger project cancellations." Her face told me she hadn't known about those. "I'll need to discuss this with Thomas and Margaret," she said. "Of course," I replied smoothly. "I've also got several interviews coming up. If Callister would like me involved in client handoffs, I can make time, outside normal hours." The implication was clear: my cooperation was valuable, and not guaranteed. 2 days later, they returned with a new offer: 6 months' pay, 8 months of benefits, accelerated stock vesting, and the revised non-disparagement clause. A win. As severance negotiations wrapped up, my job hunt exploded. The interview at Nexus Systems, thanks to Elizabeth, led to a second meeting with their executive team. Tech Future quickly followed, scheduling a day-long session with senior leaders. By the end of my second week post-termination, I had 3 offers, all with better titles, higher pay, and equity packages recognizing my leadership track record. The standout came from Nexus, Senior Director of Client Success, reporting to the COO, with a salary 30% above my former rate, equity options, and a signing bonus that covered any gap left by severance. I'd be creating a department from scratch, implementing ideas Callister had repeatedly ignored. I'd even hold a seat on the leadership team, my voice finally at the table. Word got around. Former colleagues began reaching out. Jessica asked if there might be roles opening up. Andrew wanted to understand the company's culture and growth opportunities. Even Nathan from IT discreetly inquired about tech leadership positions. I honored my non-solicitation clause, never actively recruiting, but I answered honestly, and promised to pass along resumes if they applied on their own. Sensing the risk of a larger fallout, Margaret suddenly reached out with a lunch invitation under the pretense of ensuring a smooth transition. I declined courteously, pointing to a packed schedule filled with client handoff meetings and personal obligations. "I'm happy to answer any specific questions over email," I said professionally. As outlined in our separation terms, I remain committed to supporting a seamless transition. In truth, the idea of sharing a meal with someone who had methodically dismantled my role was deeply unappealing. The time for diplomacy had long passed. We were no longer colleagues, just 2 professionals fulfilling the final clauses of a business agreement. The last major decision I had to make was which offer to accept. After detailed consideration and thoughtful talks with James, I chose Nexus Systems. Their company values aligned closely with my own. The position promised both independence and influence, and perhaps most meaningfully, it was with Callister's top competitor. I called Elizabeth to formally accept. We agreed on a start date 2 weeks after my transition period concluded, giving me a short but much-needed window to reset before launching this new phase. Just 3 days later, I received an unexpected call from Jackson at Jackson Financial. "I heard you've accepted a role with Nexus," he said directly. "Word travels fast," I responded, treading cautiously to avoid any implication of impropriety. "Always does in our line of work," he laughed. "Here's the thing, Rebecca, we've been looking to diversify service providers. Once you've settled in, I'd appreciate a conversation about potentially working together again. Of course, I replied measuredly. Once I'm on board, I'd be glad to make introductions. Not introductions, Jackson clarified. Our agreement is with Callister, but our trust was always with you. That same sentiment echoed from two other major clients in the following days. Though I took every precaution to avoid anything resembling client solicitation, honoring the terms of my exit, it was becoming increasingly clear that many clients viewed my move as a signal to follow. My reputation and relationships carried weight, and their loyalty hadn't disappeared with my title. The morning I signed my official offer letter with Nexus coincided with my final client meeting at Callister. The symmetry of endings and beginnings wasn't lost on me. I handed Amanda my final transition materials, neatly organized in a folder. As I did, Margaret appeared in the doorway of my temporary office. "I hear congratulations are in order," she said, her expression unreadable. "Senior Director at Nexus, quite a step up." "Thank you," I replied evenly, neither friendly nor hostile. "I hope there are no hard feelings," she continued, fishing for reassurance. "These structural changes are never personal." I looked her in the eye, maintaining a poised exterior while letting a trace of my real sentiment show. "Of course not," I said calmly. "Business is business. I'm sure we'll cross paths at future industry events." The message between the lines was unmistakable. We were now rivals, and I was entering this new landscape with leverage she had underestimated. Margaret gave a stiff nod and left, perhaps finally recognizing the consequences of her actions. In trying to neutralize a perceived threat, she had unknowingly created a real competitor, one intimately familiar with Callister's vulnerabilities and client pain points. That afternoon, I walked out of Callister for the last time, no cardboard box in hand, no security guard trailing me. Just me, confident and self-assured, severance finalized, and future mapped out. The power play Margaret thought she'd won was, in truth, only the beginning of a longer, more strategic game. And I had no intention of losing. 6 months into my role at Nexus Systems, the contrast between my new reality and my old environment was profound. As Senior Director of Client Success, I had shaped a team from the ground up, built around principles I had championed for years. Open collaboration, forward-thinking client communication, and recognition for contributions across all levels. My 15-person team was a blend of seasoned professionals I'd recruited from across the industry and rising talent I was actively mentoring, much like Brian had once done for me. Our mission was simple: deliver such remarkable client experiences that renewals and expansions became organic, not reactive. And it was working. Since my arrival, client satisfaction scores had jumped 18%. Our renewal rate reached 92%, a company record. Word was spreading, the Nexus difference was becoming known throughout the industry. Meanwhile, updates from former colleagues at Callister painted a far more chaotic picture. Margaret struggled to retain the key relationships I had nurtured for years. The personal nuances, the historical context, the subtle preferences, all that had left with me. And it showed in their quarterly results. Amanda, thrust into my former role without proper preparation, had stepped down after just 4 months. The demands of managing high-stakes client portfolios while adjusting to internal politics had proven too much. Her replacement, reportedly an old contact of Margaret's, had already mishandled a major account escalation and was under scrutiny. Perhaps most gratifying was the knowledge that 3 cornerstone accounts I had managed had ultimately moved their business to Nexus, totaling over $2 million in recurring revenue. I had gone to great lengths to avoid crossing legal lines, not a single direct solicitation. But the clients came anyway, driven by declining service and trust in the relationships we'd built together. The industry conference in Chicago marked my first public reappearance in the same space as many of my former peers. From the moment I entered the welcome reception, I was greeted with enthusiasm. Colleagues congratulated me on the progress I'd made at Nexus. Across the room, I caught Margaret watching, her expression poorly masking irritation. Later that evening, fate placed us side by side in the buffet line. "You're looking well," she said, attempting small talk. "Nexus must be treating you right." "It's been an incredibly fulfilling 6 months," I answered with a professional smile. "And how are things at Callister?" "Great," she said, a bit too brightly. "Some bumps after the reorg, but we're on track for a record quarter." I nodded politely, even though I knew from industry sources the claim was far from true. "That's good to hear. Change always creates new openings." As we parted ways, I overheard two analysts discussing Callister's downward trajectory, particularly the correlation between lost clients and the exit of senior personnel. The following day, I presented a case study on transforming client experiences to a packed audience. The Q&A session stretched well beyond its allotted time, filled with eager inquiries. As the room cleared, Nathan from Callister's IT department approached me. "That was outstanding," he said. "You laid out exactly what I've been trying to get Thomas and Margaret to hear for years." "How are things going there?" I asked cautiously. He glanced around before responding. "Rough. Another restructure might be coming. Thomas is starting to question Margaret's choices, especially related to talent losses." He handed me his card, personal email scrawled on the back. "Just in case Nexus ever needs an IT director," he added with a knowing smile. The conference turned out to be a watershed moment, both for my career and for how I was perceived within the industry. My presentation was highlighted in the leading sector newsletter, and Nexus received several inquiries about potential partnerships focused on improving client success. I returned to headquarters energized, more confident than ever in the direction we were taking. 2 weeks later, we won a high-profile bid for Axiom Partners, an account Callister had held for over 10 years. They cited our innovative, human-centered approach as the key differentiator. The contract was the largest in Nexus history, and we toasted the victory in style. As our team expanded, I was deliberate with each new hire, prioritizing mindset and collaboration over just technical skill. When Jessica applied for a management role, her application stood out, not just because of our shared past, but because her philosophy aligned perfectly with ours. "I want to be clear," I told our COO. "I'm not recruiting from Callister. Jessica applied on her own, and she's the most qualified candidate." "Even if you were," he replied, "you've earned that right. Build the best team possible." Jessica joined a month later, bringing valuable knowledge and professional relationships, all within the ethical bounds of her own agreement. 2 more former colleagues followed in the next quarter, each adding crucial skills and perspective to our growing unit. The ultimate vindication came when I received a discreet request for a meeting, from Frederick Hamilton, a Callister board member I had long respected. Over lunch at his club, he got straight to the point. "We're worried about Callister's direction," he confided. "We've lost market share, morale is suffering, and Nexus is becoming a serious threat." He paused before continuing. "Leadership changes are on the table. Thomas is stepping down. Margaret's being moved into a regional role. We'd like you to consider returning, as Chief Client Officer." It was the kind of offer I had once dreamed of. Executive leadership. Board-level influence. The chance to rebuild the house I'd helped construct. But that was before I understood what a supportive culture truly looked like. "I appreciate the offer," I said sincerely. "But my future is here, at Nexus. We're building something extraordinary, with full alignment between leadership and execution." Frederick looked resigned but respectful. "I suspected that would be your answer." Still, I had to ask. "The decision to push you out is now widely recognized as a serious misstep." That evening over dinner, I shared the conversation with James, expecting him to feel the same satisfaction I did. But instead, he asked a single question that made me stop. "Are you happy with how it all turned out?" I paused. and then smiled. Not just happy, I said. Grateful. Had they not pushed me out, I might have stayed indefinitely, content, unaware of what I was truly capable of creating elsewhere. I would have missed out on real executive leadership, on discovering my full worth. 2 days later, a leading industry journal published an article on groundbreaking client success strategies, with Nexus hailed as the rising benchmark. The piece featured a quote from Thomas, clearly in damage control mode, touting Mallister's commitment to client engagement. The irony wasn't lost on those who knew the recent events. Margaret was notably absent from the next major industry event. Whispers spread about her role being significantly reduced after back-to-back quarters of client churn. At what turned out to be his final public appearance before stepping down, Thomas approached me during a networking reception. "I owe you an apology, Rebecca," he said quietly. I let myself believe that institutional experience and long-standing client trust were less valuable than trendy strategies. It cost us. Hindsight makes decisions seem easier, I replied carefully. This one should have been obvious from the start, he said. 15 years of loyalty deserved far better. I'm sorry we lost you. The acknowledgement was meaningful, but by then, I didn't need it. My worth had already been proven by what I'd built, not by others' recognition. The validation that once felt essential had been replaced by the quiet joy of leading something aligned with my values, with a team that shared my vision. The final chapter of the story unfolded over dinner with Harold, my mentor from early in my career, now fully retired. He still followed industry news with the calm detachment of someone who'd witnessed countless corporate rises and falls. There's talk Mallister might be acquired, he said. Their stock is under pressure, ripe for a buyout. I've heard similar, I replied. Multiple buyers are reportedly interested. Is Nexus one of them? He asked, smirking knowingly. We're exploring all growth opportunities, I responded with a measured tone. In truth, Nexus was actively evaluating the acquisition of several Mallister divisions. The very company that had cast me aside might soon be partially absorbed by the one that had believed in me. Life doesn't often offer perfect symmetry, but this came close. Still, it wasn't about revenge, not anymore. It wasn't about proving Margaret wrong. It was about building something meaningful, something lasting, and something deeply aligned with who I am. And in that pursuit, I had already far surpassed anything I once imagined. Today marks 1 year since I walked out of Mallister Technologies for the final time. As I sip my morning coffee from our deck, watching the sunrise blush the sky, I reflect on the path from that dark day to this peaceful morning. The professional transformation has been tremendous. At Nexus, our client success team has grown to 32 people across 4 specialized units. We've driven a 28% revenue increase and maintained the highest client satisfaction ratings in our industry. Just last month, a top business publication featured us as a model of leadership during high-growth scaling. But the personal transformation has been even more significant. For 15 years, I tied my identity to my role at Mallister. When it was taken, I felt like I'd lost a part of myself. Now, I understand that my value isn't rooted in a job title or company name. It comes from within, my leadership style, my expertise, my principles. That shift in mindset changed everything, including how I now relate to work. At Mallister, I often sacrificed weekends, evenings, and life moments for the job. Now, I work hard and smart during business hours, and then I truly disconnect. I show up fully in my personal life. James noticed it first. You laugh more, he told me. And when you're home, you're really here, not just physically, but mentally too. Our relationship has blossomed in this new rhythm. The family plans we kept shelving have finally moved forward. We're renovating a guest room into a nursery and preparing to adopt within the year. The priorities we once delayed for career goals now hold the center of our lives. This sense of balance has carried over to my professional interactions. At Nexus, I launched a mentorship program for women in tech, something I wish had existed for me years ago. Currently, 12 rising professionals are paired with senior mentors, receiving the kind of career guidance, support, and advocacy that fosters real growth. Jessica, who joined Nexus 6 months ago after leaving Mal Lister, met me for lunch last week to celebrate her half-year mark. Over salads, she reflected, at Mal Lister, even your biggest win felt fleeting, like your worth reset after every project. Here, it feels like we're building something together. Wins actually mean something. That's by design, I told her. No one should feel like they're replaceable. Of course, public recognition has followed. Last month, I received the Transformational Leadership Award at the National Technology Summit. As I stood on stage, glass trophy in hand, I spotted a few familiar Mal Lister executives in the audience. Their faces were etched with a mix of respect and unmistakable regret. Since then, I've heard Mal Lister is still struggling. My departure sparked a broader exodus of key talent. Their stock has fallen by 40%, and acquisition chatter persists. Margaret was eventually removed from her executive post and sent to manage a regional office, a clear demotion. But I feel no glee in their troubles. Many good people still work there, colleagues I admire. When they reach out about joining Nexus, I consider each case thoughtfully, focused on their potential, not on settling old scores. This, perhaps, is the biggest shift in me. I've learned that real success isn't about showing others they were wrong. It's about staying true to your values and building something good. Revenge may bring momentary satisfaction, but creating something that lasts, that's where fulfillment lives. Healing didn't happen all at once. There were days when a casual news alert about Mal Lister would reignite old anger. Or seeing a LinkedIn update from Margaret would trigger fresh indignation. But over time, the sharp edge dulled. The story became just one part of my journey, not the defining moment. The betrayal taught me critical lessons about loyalty, self-advocacy, and the danger of letting any job become your whole identity. Maybe most importantly, I now trust my instincts. The red flags I once brushed aside at Mal Lister now serve as guideposts. I've developed a deeper understanding of workplace politics without becoming cynical. And in losing what I thought I couldn't live without, I found freedom. For years, I feared change and failure. Now, I see that even the worst-case scenarios can lead to the greatest opportunities. This confidence has made me a more thoughtful leader, and a better partner, friend, and family member. As I reflect today, I'm filled with gratitude. What once felt like devastation now looks like a turning point, one I needed to fully step into my potential. If you're in a season of professional uncertainty, remember, your value isn't defined by one company's inability to recognize it. What you bring to the table matters, deeply. Sometimes, the scariest turns lead to the best destinations. Has a career setback ever led to your own breakthrough? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Because sometimes, our greatest growth begins at the moment we think we've lost everything.